Hello and welcome. What I'd love to do today is to kind of talk about pioneering. I'm going to share my screen so you can see what's going on. And I'm going to base this more in terms of stories and reflections than a formal lecture, because I think that's what PMP is, isn't it? As you're meeting different maybe kinds of ministries that you might have considered before. So I'm going to make this quite informal. That was a massive problem in our community in Newham was knife crime and street violence. There was a complete spike in knife crime, and Newham was one of the most badly affected boroughs nationally. And we knew it was affecting many young people. It was taking many lives, and many in our youth project, in our sports projects, had lost friends to knife crime. And we saw that Shane was doing something around gun crime in the States. So through these networks that we had with other Christian activists and through talking to our own community, we approached our local chief of police and said, would they help us with their liaison officer was our first contact, to do something in our own community as a response. And we asked them to release knives that had been seized from Newham to us for a poetic art project that would have an ongoing legacy for the common good of the people of Newham. And because we've known them very well and we've been in other meetings with them, we have good relationships with our councillors, with our MP, with our mayor, they agreed. So we got hold of crates of these really scary looking weapons, all of which had come from our borough. And as ministers, that was just a really sobering time. If you ever want to pray into a situation, if you get up close and personal to it, your prayer changes. And so the issue of knife crime became something that was really central to how we saw ourselves as ministers in our community. We gathered people together. Now, these are just some kids on our summer scheme, and one of the young leaders on the summer scheme had actually lost his best friend to knife crime. There were several young people like that. And so we got them involved in dreaming up a day that would help to highlight this issue, but to do something positive about it. And what you can see there is a finished piece of artwork. We took those knives and we created, with some friends of ours, this knife beetle made out of the knives that had been seized from our community. And if you go on the website, Red Letter Christians UK, and you look under campaigns, you'll see many of the stories and videos. And what was great was we had that experience of going very local, but through Red Letter Christians, we networked with other communities. There's a guy called Luke, an Anglican minister from Luton, and Mick, who's from Manchester, and there's Naomi from Birmingham, and their communities were going to do the same kinds of things, and they did. So we felt like we had this kind of wider network of friends who were doing this journey with us and praying with us, but we were very local as well. And at the actual day, we just used, through connections that we have in our community, local people to come together and to express their hopes and fears. So you can see there Mike, who is a partner of a friend of ours through the charity that we formed, BDCA, and he's a metalsmith. And we talked to him and said, like, we don't have any funding, Mike, but we have this vision to take these knives and create a sculpture. And he got on board straight away and actually gave hours and hours and hours of free time and expertise to make the sculpture for us. And he had two friends who were blacksmiths, two women blacksmiths, and they said, well, it's possible to set up a forge in your community garden. We can do that safely, and we can invite the young people and the parents who've been most affected by knife crime to come and to beat the knives. We invited our mayor, so Roxana Fiaz is a fantastic mayor in Newham, a Muslim woman who is, I think, one of the greatest cheerleaders for our faith-based community project. And there's our MP, a wonderful Christian, Stephen Timms, who's been a lifelong friend and always will get behind what we do. There's the Chief of Police there, and parents who've lost loved ones in the knife crime epidemic. And there's Shane Claiborne from Philadelphia. And it was an incredible day, but the characteristic of the day was that we were going to do this in our community, with our community, and it wasn't a church-run event. The church were bringing the soft power, I like that phrase, the soft power of great relationships and some vision and an ongoing ability to draw volunteers together and to listen to people, to really listen to people, and to say that we believe the Christian gospel is the transformation of things that are designed and purposed for evil to be resurrected for good. And so in our morning seminar, I invited a friend down called Tim Watson, who's a beats liturgist. So he's a poet who writes poetry and prayer in certain contexts, and he's based on the South Coast. But he came up, and at one of the workshops we did in the morning with different church leaders and community leaders was to write a litany, a call and response prayer that's popular in Anglican circles and others. And so we were kind of dipping into different streams of Christianity, and that's another characteristic of pioneering. And he helped to write with the gathered people there this litany, and the response line was, "We beat these knives from death to life." And there were about 12 different kind of verses that people wrote together, and then everybody said, "We beat these knives from death to life." And at the end of it, we could say, "Amen." It was a prayer. It was in public. It was visual as we took those weapons and made them into a sculpture. It involved people of all faiths or none. And as ministers, we were there to express our kingdom of God, not just the anger that we had that this was happening in our community, but the hope we had that God could transform and bring resurrection out of this darkness. I'll just show you one of the scary stills there. That's Mike working on these knives. And then what we did, which is very, I think, a good characteristic of pioneering work, is we thought we don't just want to have an event. We don't want to have something that's spectacular. We did want to have that, but we wanted to do more than that. We wanted to think the legacy in our community. And that again was framed by conversations we had around the common good of our community and partnerships that we developed during the times and the many meals, actually, where we got people together to plan our anti-knife event. And one of the partnerships that developed was through the Salvation Army in Stratford. And so what we wanted to do was to have some GoFundMe pages that people who came to the anti-knife crime event could respond and have a way of donating to put the only knife surrender bin in Newham back on the streets of Newham. There'd been one in the past, but they're quite expensive to maintain because there are lots of health and safety measures around them. So we contacted another Christian charity called Word for Weapons and our friends in Hall Street Salvation Army in Stratford, and we decided to situate this weapon bin on their premises rather than ours, because although we'd done the majority of fundraising, their premises was far more central to where the real problems of knife crime were, which was Stratford. And so that's an example really of thinking not what is good for us, maybe to gain some credit from, but what is good for the people that we love. And so partnerships become far more equal and reciprocal and less kind of competitive between different expressions of church. And then what happened was we raised about £2,000, and on the day of the knife event, the mayor was just so taken with what was happening that she said Newham Council are going to match fund this. And we actually raised in total over £5,000. That was all from local people and the provision that came from working with the council. And that weapon bin is right outside Paul Street Salvation Army, and people know that Christian community is there for good as well. So I suppose that experience for me was like a one-off day, a really special day, but it was kind of like a microcosm of how we work as pioneers in our community. It always begins with listening to people. It is always shaped by partnerships, and they are always outside of not only our own church congregation, but to other Christian communities and beyond them. We love to involve creativity and to allow creativity to spark, to kind of capture imagination in our community, because we think that's been missing from many expressions of Christian worship. And we also love to bring prayer and new forms of worship into what we do. So for us on that day, it was creating a litany that we could say in public. Now that kind of model of working is where my heart just sings. You know, it was such a great day, and we've had so many other similar experiences as we've lived out a call to pioneer. And I want to tell you a little bit more about what it means to be a pioneer in the next session, and then some of the pitfalls and the dangers of a pioneering call. But I hope that's given you a taste of our story, and maybe now you can think, yeah, there are ways actually that I am already working as a pioneer, and maybe there are things that I could take as a next step into partnership, into listening, into creativity, into apt worship. Maybe there are some people now that you're thinking, I should contact them because actually we're doing something very similar, or we're facing a similar issue. Maybe we shouldn't compete and try to make this a church project. Maybe the church could be present and be part of the picture, be, I guess, more like salt in the mix of things. So that's quite enough from me. Thank you for listening.